just knocked out our kick and our snare tracks. Moving on to toms, we're going to start with our rack tom. We've got our rack tom here is the yellow track, and the floor tom is this kind of purple track. Before we dive in, though, let's hear some of these tom hits in context of the song.
Oh, I'll be inside now.
Cool. Great. So let's first focus on our rack tom here. Before we talk about these 3 adjustments that you can see that I've made, let's just hear our rack tom in isolation. Cool. Dum, dum. First things first, before we talk about that big notch, I'm just going to turn on our high pass filter. You know it, you love it. We've kind of already talked about that in detail. There's no valuable, meaningful information happening below. It looks like about like 95. So just going to axe that. We don't want it to clutter up our processing. We've killed it. So now that we have done that, we can talk about our first big cut, this green cut, this relatively wide and deep cut. Let's hear it in isolation. So surprisingly, as you can hear, I'm kind of cutting this rack tom's fundamental frequency. I mean, the body of this drum is really much right where I'm cutting it. It's like about 140, 150 like that. I'm cutting it just because I feel when I hear this track, it pokes out to me as too boomy, as too resonant, as just too round and full on the bottom. Obviously, we want some of that. We need some of that because that's like the whole foundation of the track. But just me hearing this, my immediate reaction is like, oh, that's a little bit too fat. Fat on the bottom. This is a fat rack. This is a fat rack tom. It can't be this fat. So I decided to cut it. So let's hear just some super fast before and afters isolating this frequency. Cool, great. Feeling good about that adjustment. And then we can just jump to the next one. It's the only other adjustment I made on this track. And it is that high frequency, subtle boost. And just like we saw with our kick track and both of our snares, I just want to make sure that the attack, the literal sound of the stick hitting the head, cuts through the mix. So it feels present now. I just want to give it a little extra love just because I know from experience it's kind of easy for toms to kind of get buried. So let's see if we can hear that frequency in isolation. So then now that we've made those 3 adjustments, let's just quickly toggle on and off our EQ. Great. Not night and day or anything. I mean, it still basically sounds like the same drum, but it's just a little bit more reined in, not as overpoweringly resonant on the bottom. So that's our treatment for our rack tom. Feeling good about that. Let us move on to our floor tom, which is the track below it, this purple one. We're just going to solo this track, look at what is under the hood here. Great. So looking at this EQ, you can already tell that I made some more aggressive adjustments to this floor tom than I did to the rack tom. I mean, overall, sounds good. That's an excellent starting place. Let's start by talking about this second cut that I made, the green one, kind of the relatively wide and deep cut. Let's actually just hear that frequency range in isolation. Cool. So that frequency range, as you can hear, is not actually this floor tom's fundamental frequency. That is going to be our next adjustment, that blue boost. We're going to be boosting our fundamental. But here I'm cutting this low mid-range kind of honky, hollow, unpleasant sound. I mean, it's not so terribly offensive, but it is getting in the way. It's cluttering up that frequency range. Down the line, it's going to be masking other instruments and voices that need to take up that space. And it's de-emphasizing our fundamental. If we want to emphasize our fundamental, we could, one, boost to that frequency, which we're about to, or we could cut the frequencies immediately above and below it. So that's what we're doing here. I'm taking this already relatively unpleasant low-mid frequency range that is overly present, and I'm just gonna aggressively notch it out because on its own, it's unpleasant, it's masking other things, and it's distracting. It's keeping us from being able to hear as clearly as we want the fundamental of this floor tom. So that's that. You know, it's first things first. That's what I heard when I opened up this track. We can move on, go to the left here, and just hear our fundamental. Right there it is. Dum, dum, dum. It already feels present, but I just want to make sure that this track is full and resonant on the bottom. You know, that's like the whole point of our floor tom. Next is I made this cut in the orange band. Let's hear that frequency range in isolation really fast. Kind of that hollow, mid-range, unpleasant frequency. This was also kind of the trouble spot with our kick drum, except with the kick drum track, I made a way more dramatic and wide cut. For this, it's not that terribly offensive, but if left unaddressed, it's just going to mask other voices and instruments down the line. We just want to make sure that space is clear, so we're going to notch that out. And then our final adjustment here, giving it a wide boost in the high-end attack, because we just want to make sure that that literal attack, the stick hitting the head, is present and cuts through the mix. That's going to be the thing that helps us cut through the mix. So let's hear this frequency range in isolation. Cool. And it already feels pretty present, but just like with our fundamental, I'm just giving it a little bit extra attention just because I really want to spotlight that frequency range. So that is it for our floor tom. Let's hear it before and after, on and off with our EQ. So let's hear before, how we started. After. Right on. Cool. Yeah, not completely night and day. We didn't reinvent the wheel here, but to me, that feels less crowded, less muddy, and more present in all of the right areas. So now let's just close out our video talking about toms and hear what we've got so far in context. Nice. And then just for fun, we can turn off our EQs for both of our toms and just hear what this fill did sound like. Great. Cool. I'm feeling awesome about the adjustments. Those feel way stronger and way cleaner. So yeah, I'm happy with how all of our shells are sounding. We're going to move on to the next video. The whole next video, we're going to be talking about the overhead tracks, the room, and these cymbal splash punch-ins. So after the next video, we're going to be wrapping up drums and moving on to bass. So super stoked on that. I will see you in the next video.